Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Imagine peeling back the curtain on someone you really only thought you knew from those super dramatic moments on daytime TV.
Right. We're talking the really iconic stuff, the paternity tests, the lie
The
detectors.
whole "you are the father"
Yeah.
scene, the audience going wild. That's the Maury Povich most people picture.
Exactly. But what if you stumble upon this tiny kind of unexpected window into his life off that stage?
A moment that feels much more real, unfiltered, maybe even a little, awkward.
That's it.
Well, that's pretty much the journey we're taking today. This deep dive kicked off with a really fascinating find, a YouTube creator who came across this little scene clip. And it features Maury and his wife, Connie Chung, who's obviously very famous herself.
Right. And our main source here, what we're really digging into, is essentially that YouTube video. It talks about and includes parts of a podcast chat between Maury Povich and Connie Chung.
So our mission here is to pull out the most surprising, maybe the most genuine insights from this, let's be honest, pretty obscure source.
To give you a kind of shortcut to understanding a totally different side of these very public figures.
And what these sort of fleeting, low-key moments might tell us about, well, public image, relationships, even just time itself.
Okay.
So this deep dive really starts with how this all came to light. You've got a YouTube creator just browsing, exploring content platforms, and they find this clip.
Uh-huh.
Now, this creator's perspective, which is important context from our source, kind of starts by reflecting on the Maury show itself.
Right. The daytime show.
Yeah. Specifically, its focus on paternity testing and, well, in this creator's view, how it perhaps framed men negatively or maybe presented women without much judgment, no matter what they did.
Sort of aiming to connect with that daytime female audience. That was the creator's take.
Exactly. That's the perspective presented in our source material. It's their analysis of the show's, typical dynamic.
And that initial viewpoint is pretty key, actually, because it really sets up the contrast. Well, you have this image of Maury Povich defined by this very specific high drama, often quite confrontational TV format, playing to a perceived audience.
Right.
And then you suddenly find this clip and it's just something completely different.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The YouTube creator highlights this clip from a podcast with Maury Povich and Connie Chung.
And straight away we get some, basic facts. They're 86 and 78 years old.
Yeah, and married for 41 years.
41 years. Just, wow. Let that sink in for a second.
It's a huge amount of time.
It's a lifetime together, really, and especially considering they've both had these massive public careers just in very different parts of the media world.
Absolutely. Knowing that background definitely makes any little glimpse into their private dynamic feel pretty fascinating.
For sure.
And the core of this specific clip, it dives right into Connie's past relationships. Maury in a way that feels very Maury. He pronks her about messing around with stars.
That is a remarkably blunt way to start that conversation, isn't it?
Totally. No gentle lead in there.
Just straight to it, her romantic history before him.
Exactly. And Connie's first reaction, according to the clip, is basically denial. She says she just knew them.
Uh-huh.
But Maury kind of pushes back. He keeps using the phrase, messed around.
You can almost hear that little bit of, playful needling that comes from being together for decades.
Yeah, that familiarity.
And that difference between new and messed around, it's quite telling, actually.
How do you mean?
Well, it speaks to how people frame their past, doesn't it? Maybe how Connie prefers to remember or talk about those interactions versus how Maury perhaps deliberately uses stronger language, maybe to tease her, maybe just to get a reaction.
And they get specific. There's an anecdote shared about Warren Beatty.
Oh, okay.
And Connie's sister, Lynn Povich, is quoted in the source saying something pretty memorable. She said, "Every woman who came to California had to go through him. It was like an immigration system."
Wow. Okay. That quote alone paints a hell of a picture.
Right. Of a certain time and place in Hollywood. It's a vivid image, maybe a bit outrageous.
Definitely vivid.
So Maury then asks Connie if she went through Beatty, using her sister's exact phrase.
Connecting it directly.
Yeah. And Connie corrects him. So, while acknowledging the general scene her sister described, she's quick to draw a line about her own experience in that clip.
Which shows a pretty remarkable level of comfort between them, doesn't it? And candor.
For sure.
I mean, they can bring up these incredibly famous names, these stories from potentially sensitive parts of their past decades ago.
Yeah.
And she feels totally fine correcting him right there, even knowing it's being recorded.
Yeah, it's quite something. Then there's another memory shared. Connie going out with an eagle.
from the band The Eagles.
That's the one. And
Oh.
she tells this story about not actually knowing who he was until he apparently played Hotel California on the piano for her.
Get out. That detail is amazing. Imagine being out with someone and hearing one of the biggest songs ever, played by the guy who actually wrote it, and not realizing it at first.
Right. It really puts her world at the time into perspective. Maybe, like, rock music wasn't her main focus then?
Oh, clearly not.
Anyway, she apparently told Maury about this date later on, and the source makes a point of noting they were dating non-exclusively then.
Ah, okay. So not committed.
Right. So the source notes nobody was cheating.
And that's their shared understanding, how they've processed that bit of history together. It sounds like they've definitely talked about those early dating years before they got serious.
And they have a mutual agreement on how to categorize those relationships compared to, their own commitment later.
Makes sense.
The conversation, though, it takes a bit of a turn into something, well, a little bizarre. Maury uses this analogy about a coyote trap.
A coyote trap.
Yeah. He says, like, if you wake up with your arm under someone's head and you don't know how you got there,
Yeah.
you have to chew off your arm to get away.
Okay, hold on. The coyote trap analogy. Chewing off your arm. In the middle of talking about past dating.
I know.
That is spectacularly random. What is he even trying to get at there?
Well, that's the kicker. Connie's reaction in the clip is apparently gold. She explicitly says she has no idea what he's talking about.
She doesn't get the analogy.
Not at all. And she calls it a dumb story.
Okay, that is fascinating. It shows their dynamic isn't just him talking and her nodding.
Not at all.
She's not afraid to just tell him straight up, I don't get it, and I think it's silly.
Right. And it reveals maybe a long-standing thing between them. She mentions she's heard him say it before and still doesn't understand it.
It's a real window into their specific, maybe slightly odd way of communicating after 41 years together. Their own internal language, maybe.
And the clip gives us other glimpses into their current dynamic, too.
Like what?
Well, Connie mentioned she doesn't really want to do a program together, like a show or something, because she feels it might encroach on our personal relationship.
Protecting the private space.
And Maury's immediate response, completely deadpan according to the source, is, what personal relationship?
Ouch. Wow. That is such a long married couple line, isn't it?
Totally.
It sort of lands somewhere between a really dry joke and maybe, just maybe, a tiny bit of resignation about the reality of living and working together for so long.
It definitely punctures any kind of, overly romanticized image.
Yeah, it does.
And it gets even more candid than that. Maury tells Connie she's been really shitty to him lately.
Whoa, okay, he actually says that.
Yep. And he half jokes it might be her post-book stress disorder. She must have recently written a book.
Really shitty post-book stress disorder. That is surprisingly raw language.
Right. Especially for public figures, even if it's in a less visible podcast format.
It really speaks to a deep level of familiarity where they can just voice frustrations directly. No filters.
It's the kind of thing you might say to your partner, behind closed doors, not necessarily when there's a microphone on.
Yeah.
Which is why this clip feels so revealing.
Absolutely.
So Connie offers an apology in the clip. And Muri's reply is just classic Maria, apparently. He says it's the first and last apology she'll get from him.
Oh, okay.
They also briefly touch on her being cranky.
The first and last apology line. Yeah, that's definitely the sound of a long marriage.
Totally.
It's like accepting the apology, but immediately putting up a little boundary, maybe with some humor mixed in.
Yeah.
All these little exchanges, the coyote trap thing, the what personal relationship comment, the really shitty remark. They really paint a picture, don't they?
They do.
Of a relationship with its own unique rhythm, its own blend of affection, teasing, and maybe some pretty blunt honesty that's just developed over 4 decades.
So, okay, what does this all mean? When you put all these moments together, the surprising chat about past flames, that bizarre analogy, the super candid complaints about how things are right now.
Yeah.
The source commentary really emphasizes how this low-view podcast clip shows a completely different side of Maury Povich, much more unfiltered compared to that carefully managed TV persona we all know.
That really is the core insight here, isn't it? The YouTube creator in our source used this specific phrase. They said Maury was checking and sunning his damn wife.
Right. I remember seeing that in the source.
Which is such a vivid way of capturing the creator's feeling that Maury wasn't performing here. He was just interacting with his wife in a real, unguarded way, maybe teasing her, maybe challenging her like he would in their private life.
It's the total opposite of the highly produced dramatic persona from his show.
Exactly.
The source also reflects a bit on the history being discussed. I mean, relationships from like 50 years ago, and finds the dynamic shown in the clip now kind of endearing. But at the same time, the source notes a mention of a perceived lack of accountability in the context of how some historical relationships were approached back then.
Sort of reflecting maybe different standards from that era compared to today.
Yeah, that seems to be the idea presented in the source material.
It's interesting that the source can kind of hold both those ideas together, finding something sweet or endearing in their comfortable banter now. Right.
While also observing, from a modern lens, maybe a difference in how past actions might be framed or talked about. It just shows the complexity of looking back,
Definitely. And that YouTube creator, having seen this more personal, unguarded side of Maury, expresses this desire to interview Maury Povich specifically about his real feelings, about all those old paternity test results, now that the kids involved would all be adults.
Oh, that's a fascinating question.
Isn't it?
It really raises that idea of the long-term impact of those TV moments.
Yeah.
How did the people at the center of it feel decades later, seeing the lives that unfolded after those incredibly dramatic public reveals?
Yeah, it's a heavy thought, and it's one the source kind of leaves us with. So connecting this back to you, the listener, this whole deep dive gives you this really specific, almost insider look. It shows how even these incredibly famous public figures, people you feel like you know from seeing them on TV for years, can have these surprisingly candid, pretty low-key interactions captured in these less visible corners of the internet. Right. It shows you the layers that exist beneath that public image.
And maybe the power of seeking out different kinds of sources beyond just the mainstream stuff to get a more complete picture.
It's a really powerful reminder, actually, that the image presented on a huge platform like network television is often just one facet, one carefully managed facet.
Yeah.
And the digital world, just because it's so vast and sometimes obscure, can accidentally offer up these unfiltered glimpses, moments that can be way more revealing if you happen to find them and, think about the dynamics you're seeing.
So we've taken a deep dive into this specific YouTube source, which unearthed a really candid moment between Maury Povich and Connie-chan, exploring old relationships and their surprisingly blunt present-day dynamic.
Yeah, it offered a side of them you would absolutely never see on TV, a real peek behind the curtain of a very long, very public marriage.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you to maybe mull over. If this kind of unexpected, unfiltered glimpse exists for someone as universally recognized as Maury Povich, someone really defined by a very specific public role, what might be revealed about other public figures if we knew where and how to look, and maybe if they weren't quite expecting anyone to be watching across this huge, varied landscape of online content today?